Daley. Welcome to the conversation, David.
It's good to be here. I love Georgia. I wish I could be there with you all in person. Thank you, Tamaria. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everybody, for putting this together. I love what Fair Districts Georgia does, and I'm really happy to get to talk with you all. Um, Unrigged really began with a quest for hope. I had written a book on partisan gerrymandering with indeed that memorable title, which first exposed the highly effective Republican strategy called Red Map in 2010 to win state legislatures in competitive states like Ohio, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and elsewhere, just ahead of redistricting, and then to use this powerful new map making software, all the data sets to redraw not only state legislative and congressional districts, but really to hotwire our democracy itself. Now, let me assure you, nobody sets out to write a book about partisan gerrymandering. But Red Map, I mean, this had come as complete news to me. I was the editor of Salon. I edited Steve Kornacki and Joan Walsh, but we didn't write about gerrymandering. Neither did the Washington Post or the New York Times. But every day we were covering what seemed to me to be madness in our politics, in Congress, in this body that John Adams designed to be a perfect replica of the people in miniature. That people's house instead would vote to repeal Obamacare more than 50 times, each one a show vote, right? Then as a Connecticut native with a newborn child, I watched kindergartners and first graders massacred at Sandy Hook and thought, surely, despite the political power of the gun lobby, the senseless slaughter of 6-year-olds must lead to some action designed to prevent this from ever happening again. It didn't. So I asked one simple question. What happened in 2012? Why didn't the Democrats take back the US House when President Obama won re-election? Democrats took the Senate. Turns out Democrats won 1.4 million more votes than Republicans that year. Republicans held a 234-201 majority anyway. All of this, the vitriol in our politics, none of this was a mistake. Red Map, that's exactly what it created. We live in Red Map Nation. It's become this anti-majoritarian nation that gerrymandering built. It's one of the most important reasons why our politics has become so extreme and dysfunctional, why so many Americans have been in the streets demanding social justice in the middle of a pandemic. There are now 59 million Americans, that's 1 in 5 of us, who live in a state where one or both chambers of the state legislature is controlled by the party that won fewer votes in 2018. Believe me, I would give some talks about the book and I would feel like I had a dark rain cloud over my head, so you understand why I needed some optimism. That toxic combination of gerrymandering, closely followed by voter suppression laws passed by these newly unaccountable legislatures, had tied our democracy into this profoundly depressing double knot of unfairness. It wasn't easy to see a way out. And I saw a Facebook post by a young woman in Michigan named Katie Fahey. On election night, Katie, she was 27 years old. She left her job at a Grand Rapids recycling nonprofit. She put on her best red pantsuit and she flew to New York City with a golden ticket for Hillary Clinton's victory party. But that evening did not exactly go as Katie planned. 2 mornings later, before work, already fearing the family battles at the Thanksgiving table, the flying mashed potatoes that were going to be in the air, she took to social media. She wrote, "I want to take on gerrymandering in Michigan. If you're interested in doing this as well, please let me know." Oh, hey, maybe it connected because of the smiley face emoji that she added next. Or perhaps it was because gerrymandering in Michigan had severed the connection between the ballot box and the people. But that single post by a regular citizen pioneered a winning redistricting revolution in a state no one thought it could happen. They marshaled thousands of volunteers. They collected more than 400,000 signatures. It was the first effort to do this on the ballot without paid collectors. And they won in November of 2018 with more than 62% of the vote. It wasn't long after that I spoke at an event with Desmond Meade, who had taken on the difficult task of returning voting rights to almost 1.4 million people in Florida who had a felony conviction, who essentially lost their civic voice forever along with that, even after they'd served their time. It was this cruel vestige of the Jim Crow South that ensnared 10% of adults in the state, 25% of African Americans. Let me tell you, Desmond has got this inner glow if you've seen him on TV. He knew that pain because he was one of those silent citizens. One afternoon after his release, homeless, still struggling with drugs, he stood before the railway tracks outside Miami. He steeled himself to jump before the next train. It didn't come. He walks across those tracks. He checks himself into a drug treatment center that day. He finds a drug treatment center. He turns his life around, returns to college, earns a law degree. What he wanted was his right to vote back. He couldn't get it. Becomes the director of the Florida Rights Restoration Commission, builds this coalition that unites Black and white, Democrats and Republicans, ex-cons and second chance believing churchgoers. They form this mighty moral coalition, and in 2018, 64% of the state agree with them, and they back a constitutional amendment that restores their voting rights. The people of Florida voted for fairness. So I was pretty sure that we didn't need another book about how democracy dies, right? I set out to join these quiet revolutionaries who were reinvigorating our civic fabric at the time we needed it most. And I watched as these regular citizens demolished barriers that all the experts said were too stout, too high, too imposing, that it couldn't be done. I joined the Voters Not Politicians canvassers across Michigan. I door knocked across Utah and Missouri, where activists won critical reform in red states. I watched Native Americans across Utah and North Dakota mount desperate, heroic pushes to determine their street addresses and make themselves tribal IDs to preserve their voice against surgically focused voter ID bills, gerrymandering, and precinct closures. I rode the Medicaid Express, a rickety green RV across Idaho with these gutsy millennial activists who didn't understand why their legislature wouldn't take tax dollars back from the federal government to ensure that 70,000 of their neighbors would get health care, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. In Alabama, where the state legislature under court order finally returned voting rights denied to tens of thousands of citizens who had also been released from prison, but refused to allocate a dime to actually register them. We went door to door, bus station to barber shop with the concerned citizens determined to add their neighbors back to the voting rolls. Let me tell you, they won big. They won big everywhere. This is a new American revolution. It's a demand for fairness. It's the insistence that our vote is our voice, that our leaders are temporary, but the people rule, that we have no more important task than preserving our democracy and the hard-won fight to participate in it. Our hard work, our collective fight can do it. These citizens, they became the change they wanted to see. The news cycle, I know, it feeds never-ending exhaustion. We're doom scrolling on Twitter, right? These folks turned off cable news. They logged off of social media. They got to work. Idaho, the Medicaid expansion there, it began after 2 recent graduates from high school in the northernmost notch of the state. Now they were studying medicine and history, but they realized they had skills that might help a much-needed school levy organize bitter, well-funded opposition in their hometown. That victory made them hungry for more, and when they settled on healthcare, they bought this RV, they dubbed it the Medicaid Express, they crusaded to every corner of the state collecting signatures. It's Idaho, right? It's a one-party state redder than Taylor Swift's lipstick, but they captured 61% of the vote the old-fashioned way. They persuaded their neighbors that this was the right thing to do. There's a powerful story in North Dakota as well, right? It's a state with such clean elections that they don't even require you to register to vote. You show up at the polls, they've known you since kindergarten. But in 2013, perhaps not coincidentally, after the Native American vote narrowly catapulted a Democrat into the US Senate, legislators decided to pass a voter ID bill that demanded a street address. They mandated the one thing that did not exist on tribal land. The tribes knocked it back in court. The legislature kept coming back. They kept refining the law. Finally, just before the 2018 election, a judge okayed it. And so the tribes got to work. They had folks working out geo-mapping coordinates. Volunteers purchased machines, and they created so many IDs that they burned those machines out. The law directly affected the vote of these Native Americans, but on election day, they turned out in massive numbers to protect it. Turnout surged. And the legislator who wrote that original voter ID bill, he not only lost his bid for a 4th term in the State House, he lost to a woman named Ruth Buffalo, the first Native American woman ever elected to North Dakota's State House. It's not politicians leading these efforts. It's not parties. It's regular people. None of this is easy. These initiatives were challenged in court. They had to overcome legal claims. They had to beat back negative ad campaigns funded by dark money masters and powerful special interests who were just as eager to defend their status and influence. But this crucial battle had been engaged. A torch was lit, and citizens took off sprinting with it. The Supreme Court dithered and delayed, and then it bitterly closed the doors to federal courthouses on partisan gerrymandering claims, right? But people did not wait for judicial superheroes or for democracy-saving silver bullets. They acted. They became the heroes they wanted to see. We know that none of this is easy. We know that Frederick Douglass is right. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, it never will. We've seen from Florida, from other states, that some of these initiatives have run into trouble in the courts. But the history of voting rights, it's one of expansion, one of retraction, and one of expansion again. It's not a straight line forward. And that's why we've got to be in the fight. This fight is really the latest chapter in a struggle over the vote that's as old as the nation itself. We might like to pretend that this nation's story is one of ever-expanding suffrage, but the struggle did not end with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, or with the 19th Amendment, or with the Voting Rights Act. The work that remains for us will only get more difficult. Keeping a democracy, it turns out, requires work. It requires our work. But what I think these stories show is that when regular citizens unite and fight for the kind of democracy they want, when we put our hands on Dr. King's long moral arc of the universe and we pull hard, that there isn't a structural barrier that won't buckle. I want to leave you with a story from Alabama, maybe my favorite story in this book, about the night that a woman named Sherry lost her voting rights forever. It was like any other teenage night in 90s rural Alabama. They were teenagers, they were on a hood of a car, they had a marijuana cigarette and some fast food. Perhaps that same night when a police officer rolled up, I bet it happened elsewhere in town, in white suburbs, and it went a different way. They ended this evening as felons in Alabama. If you've been guilty of a crime involving moral turpitude, such as this minor drug possession charge, an offense so small it might not even be a crime in some states, you forfeit your right to vote forever. Sherry was 17. She never voted, and now she never would. Her most important right as a citizen had been erased before she'd even been able to use it. It was laws from the Jim Crow era, hardly consigned to history, that trapped her. And those citizens who went out trying to tell people that their convictions no longer cost them their right to vote forever, we found her outside the Birmingham bus station just before 6 a.m. one morning. We approached her and asked if she was registered to vote, and she waved us away, embarrassed, didn't want to respond. We told her we're out telling people about a change in the law, and her eyes grew wide, and she realized, wait, I can vote? I have a conviction. We handed her back her right to vote in minutes on her way to work. She had never been able to do it. She says, this is unbelievable. I will be a lifelong voter. This is what we are fighting about. We are fighting for Sherry, this nation. It's a nation that's been built by people, improved by people, whether it's the women who are marching for suffrage, or whether it's John Lewis and the marchers across Selma's Pettus Bridge. Progress has been long. Progress has been hard. Progress has been of our own making. John Lewis, days before his death in July, he asked to visit the new Black Lives Matter Plaza in Washington. And then in a powerful essay that he published in the Times posthumously on the day of his burial, he wrote about that trip to Washington, how inspired he was to see the power of citizens once more, these young people who were demanding their voice and running for office and courageously speaking up to power. Democracy is not a state, he wrote, it is an act. Ordinary people with extraordinary vision can redeem the soul of America by getting in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Voting and participation in the democratic process is key. The vote is the most powerful nonviolent change agent you have in a democratic society. You must use it because it is not guaranteed. You can lose it. This responsibility to fight for progress has been passed to every single one of us, all of us, believing in principle over partisanship, brought together by the belief that change belongs to us all, that equal protection belongs to us all, that one person, one vote belongs to us all. The life of John Lewis shows that this capacity for perseverance, for courage, it lies within us all. But the struggle still ongoing at his death shows that we have a long way to go. But something has been lit. You see citizens who've never before joined a protest, taking to streets, circulating petitions, stepping forward to run for office, launching new organizations or new movements that reimagine what democracy might mean. They've dreamed a different future, ignored those who said the work would be too hard. Then they devoted long hours. They came together by the thousands in RVs, in courtrooms, in bus stations, at the doors on frigid winter mornings, and they made their dreams real at the ballot box. In red states, in blue states, in every state, with people who still believe all political power is inherent in the people, that all legitimate authority depends on the consent of the governed, that representative democracy must represent us all equally. The lesson of Katie Fahey and of Desmond Meade, the Marchers for Social Justice, every one of these volunteers, all of you on this call, is that we don't need superheroes or the perfect presidential candidate to save us. That these battles on behalf of what is right, sometimes led by millennials, by former felons, by suburban women, by Americans of all ages and races who've refused to believe that the act of creating change was beyond them, are the proof. There is a mighty unrigging underway, and I hope it leaves you with the same sense of hope and optimism that it does for me. I thank you very much.